400 stanzas. On the Middle Way. With commentary by Gyel-tsap. Chapter 2. Abandoning belief in pleasure. The contaminated body is a source of suffering because it is damaged by internal causes of harm in the form of 424 diseases and external causes of harm such as sticks, clods, and so forth. Therefore the exalted with direct perception of its suffering nature see it like a foe. Nevertheless, this body should be properly protected from deterioration. By sustaining an ethically disciplined body for a long period, great merit is created in completing the vast stores of merit and wisdom. This dispels doubt as to whether perhaps it should not be nurtured since it is like a foe. As a result of the discussion about impermanence, one may feel aversion and wonder what is the value of the body which gives rise to much senselessness. Thus, alternatively, one can interpret the words, although the body is seen like a foe, and so forth as being intended to get rid of such contempt.
It is like a merchant's son who protected a thief to whom he was bound by a close tie. He established this close tie with the thief because he was afraid to lose his companionship on outings, and protected him even when he was put in jail. Assertion: if the body is to be protected, one should pamper it with food and clothing. Answer: there is no such fault. When even the slightest human suffering, such as hunger or thirst, is produced by the body, and the slightest physical pleasure, such as satisfaction from food and drink, is entirely due to external factors, why are you devoted to this hull of a body which is a container of all kinds of suffering? You should care for it just enough to practice virtue energetically and not be at fault in your use of food and clothing. It is like the following analogy: a man gave a ride in his chariot to an ogress who showed herself in a beautiful form. A little later an ugly ogress appeared ahead. He slashed her with his sharp sword, and there were two. When he also slashed those two, there were four. Then a deity spoke from the sky, saying, "If you kill that woman, they'll all be killed." He acted accordingly. Similarly, if by meditating on impermanence and suffering one gets rid of attachment and makes effort to prevent the body from coming into existence, all suffering will end.
Assertion: although pain occurs only because of the body, since it can be alleviated, it is weak and pleasure greater. Therefore one does not fear pain. Answer: if a wasp stings Devdatta while he is sitting on a soft cushion and experiencing the pleasure of enjoying attractive objects, his pleasure will vanish and he will be miserable with pain. Similarly, when humans do not mainly have pleasure because pain is very strong, should one consider so much pain as negligible? Since it is inappropriate to do so, think about suffering and feel aversion. Bali stole Sugriva's wife with much difficulty. It brought him only suffering and not even a little pleasure. To think of cyclic existence as pleasurable when one founders in a morass of suffering is like that. Since pleasure is weaker and outweighed by suffering, ordinary people are bent on attaining pleasure and run from suffering. Yet it is hard to find those whose suffering body is comfortable, for in the hope of pleasure, they create the causes for suffering. Although common beings, who are impermanent and disintegrate moment by moment, keep running from suffering, suffering pursues them like a shadow and is therefore hard to abandon. It is like climbing down a well out of fear of a mad elephant and thinking one is safe. Ordinary people, whose connection with suffering is constant, out of ignorance think they are happy.
Suffering is always close by, and if not, can be found at will without the need of effort to acquire it. But what pleasure is found at will? It is something rare for this suffering body, as rare as coolness in the sun's heat. Why do you ordinary people value pleasure which is rare but do not fear suffering which is plentiful? If you value rare and desired pleasure, it is appropriate to feel aversion for undesired and plentiful suffering. It is like the following analogy: someone who breaks into the king's treasury has wished suffering on himself and does not gain any happiness. Even a thorn causes the body with its delicate flesh great suffering. It reacts like a new leaf at the touch of a flame. Even a somewhat comfortable body is a container of great suffering. For a person to value the body and to value a foe seems similar, since both are alike in comprising causes of suffering. It is like the following analogy: a king saw a man asleep in a chariot in the noonday heat. Feeling pity, he took care of him, with the result that later even the touch of a mustard seed prevented the man from sleeping. The more one indulges in comfort, the more suffering it provokes.
Moreover, even if one cossets the body for a long time with comforts intended to cause pleasure, however long one spends, it will not in itself become pleasurable, because its nature is suffering. To say that its nature can be overruled by other factors is improper. No matter how much a mother crow nurtures a cuckoo fledgling, it will always be a cuckoo and never a crow. To assert that the body is by nature pleasurable is like that. Though lead, brass, silver and gold, when smelted temporarily assume a liquid form, they are hard by nature, and it is not their property to be liquid. Objection: its nature cannot be suffering, for those of royal caste and so forth have nothing but pleasurable feelings from birth to death.
Answer: the high, such as kings with many attendants and possessions, have constant mental suffering from fearing the decline of their own prosperity and being unable to bear others' prosperity. For common people who lack the necessities of life, the experience of suffering arises from the body. Day by day, people in the world are overwhelmed in this way by both mental and physical suffering. It is like the following analogy: a king was pleased with an expert trainer who managed to ride a difficult elephant. Seeing this, the elephant keeper felt uneasy. Another man without expertise was punished by the king, which caused him physical suffering. Assertion: though these two kinds of suffering exist, one does not notice them because great pleasure makes them insignificant.
Answer: there is no pleasure so great that it can make pain insignificant, because pleasure depends on thoughts, which are governed by pain. It is like this: when one thinks of oneself as a benefactor, mental pleasure arises, but that pleasure is stopped by the fear that, though one has wealth, it might come to an end. The arising and cessation of pleasure are governed by thoughts, and since pleasurable thoughts are destroyed by pain, they are governed by pain. Therefore nowhere in the world is there pleasure more powerful than pain. It is like the following analogy: there were two wives, a senior and a junior one. The one suffered more about seeing the other's son being shown respect than about the death of her own. When the senior wife saw the junior wife's son being decked out and shown respect, she cried bitterly. When asked what was the use of crying about her dead son, she answered that she was not crying about him, but about the junior wife's living one. Some time later, the junior wife's son fell ill and was taken to another village. After a few days, when the senior wife was near that village, she saw a dead body being carried out. She thought the junior wife's son had died and felt very happy.